Anybody else want to respond? All right. All right. With that, I want to first of all thank all of you, all of the speakers, for your time this morning and for your insight and suggestions. We'll see where we move further on. Certainly trying to answer the question, are the tunnels good for California? Have a great deal of information this morning, and I want to thank you for sharing your expertise and time with us. Thank you. All right, and thank my colleagues as well. We'll now, can I see a show of hands as to how many we have for public comment? All right, why don't we just take the first 5? Come up and have a seat. And I think without putting a severe time limit on you, the hour being 11:30, I'm going to ask you to be concise. I'm going to ask you to try and stay around 3 minutes. That would be helpful. Welcome.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is John Hooper. I'm here from San Francisco today, representing a group of San Francisco and Bay Area residents, and we're calling ourselves Protect Our Water. We formed ourselves because of, for all the voluminous data that's been developed over the years involving these scenarios we've been talking about this morning, relatively little information seems to be available about the potential adverse impacts on San Francisco Bay itself. And that's one of the reasons we decided that we ought to gather together as a group. The second reason we formed as a group is that we find, just anecdotally in San Francisco, most people don't have the vaguest idea, even now, what you're talking about. If you ask someone what they think about the governor's tunnels proposal, they think you're talking about a new BART system under the bay or something. So I want to thank you and applaud you for that reason, for holding this oversight hearing this morning, and perhaps suggest that it would be great to hold field hearings around the state. Just in terms of pure education of the public, it's obvious that the governor's tactic is more geared toward fear-mongering than education, and we need to counter that at every level we can. So thank you so much for this hearing. And I must say, I feel a little bit presumptuous after the high quality of your panelists, but consider this from a bunch of laymen, but it seems to us, having tried to educate ourselves, that the San Francisco Bay Delta estuary cannot begin to recover if more water is exported. Native fish counts alone indicate that the Delta and the Bay require significantly more fresh water, not less, in order to recover. And water exports must be reduced, not increased, to comply with applicable laws, the public trust doctrine, and reasonable use. As was mentioned by Dr. Swanson, the Delta Reform Act of 2009 called for reducing reliance on the Delta for meeting statewide water uses. That seems like a basic principle. And it's also our understanding that a first step toward a rational statewide water policy is to recognize that the underlying problem is that the demands on Sacramento and San Joaquin River waters are exceeded by actual supplies by a huge factor. I've read more than 5 times have been promised than is actually available. So I won't go through, I'll submit my written testimony for the record, but a number of viable alternatives have been suggested by your panelists this morning. We certainly support most of those. I think the vast expense of this tunnels project would vacuum up a lot of the funding that could be used for more localized and regional approaches to water storage, water conservation, and so forth. So with that, I thank you for this opportunity and again for holding this hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Hooper. Welcome.
Good morning, Senator Wolf.
Good morning.
Good morning. Panel members, Barbara Berrigan-Perea with Restore the Delta. I represent over 25,000 Californians who want to see the San Francisco Bay Delta estuary restored for our children and future generations. Thank you for the hearing. We are extremely pleased that this is happening, and we believe it is a first step. We're hoping that this committee, and in fact that the entire legislature, really begins to perform oversight on what's happening with the Delta tunnels. We really hope that it becomes immediate and that it's a primary oversight priority for the entire legislature. According to its website, DWR's mission is to manage water resources for California, to benefit the state's people, and to protect, restore, and enhance natural and human environments. That mission, however, does not seem to apply to the people and the wildlife of the Delta. As reported yesterday and by the Associated Press, there is a separate land acquisition plan for taking 300 parcels of productive Delta farms out of operation. It was not included in the revised draft EIR-EIS for the tunnels. It was a confidential document that has not seen the light of day until our colleagues acquired it through a Public Records Act request. This land acquisition plan states that 300 landowners will only be given 30 days' notice to sell their land before the state begins to move with immediate eminent domain proceedings. Never mind that these parcels of land are California's oldest family farms, many in production for 150 years, and produce a $5.2 billion economy. This 160-page land acquisition plan was created for the Metropolitan Water District by a separate entity called the Design Construction Enterprise, which is embedded within DWR and was created with an $11.4 million no-bid contract. We have two processes happening with the BDCP. We are in a public comment process that includes a lot of propaganda under the California Water Fix to sell the benefits, and then we have a process that is hidden from public view and from the light of day. We're hoping that this committee will ask a series of questions, like why the land acquisition plan was not included in the EIR. Why is DWR handing out no-bid contracts for the oversight of the second largest public works project in the history of California, and to a contracting firm without engineering qualifications? Why do Californians, people like our group who have been advocating for the restoration of the Delta, have to resort to Public Record Act requests to find the truth out about the project? Then there's the EIR itself. We are deeply disturbed that the really negative water inequality impacts of the project are buried in the appendix of the 48,000 pages. We will be releasing our first public health report on it at the end of the week. How will the tunnels help with drought if they're going to be dry 52% of the time? Where's the discussion about fixing the screens at Tracy, considering that those pumps will still be used 52% of the time? How many fish will really be saved by the experimental fish screens and new intakes that have not yet to be decided? Who's going to pay for the tunnels, and who is going to get the water? In conclusion, I just want to say that very often people in the Delta are accused of wanting the status quo. And probably out of everything that's said about Delta people, nothing makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck more. Because for years, we have been advocating for the following. We have been advocating that those pumps and the engineering at Clifton Court 4 be fixed. We have been advocating for a reduction in exports to sustainable yields to protect the Bay Delta estuary. We have been advocating for years for the type of urban water projects that we need in our urban areas, the fixing of water pipes, stormwater capture, recycling, that can make the 7 million acre-feet of water that was estimated in the NRDC report. And last, we do have to say, we're probably the only people who will stand up here and say that until the state deals with the five-fold overpromise of water in the system, we will never solve our problems regardless of where you take the water from. If we implement all these other measures, plus fix the levees to protect that sustainable yield and to protect the people of the Delta, it will give us time to do an adjudication like that has been done in Idaho and Colorado and New Mexico. We have to bring supply and balance into demand, And while we're going through that hard process, we need to do everything in our power to bring every last drop of water out of the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, very much for your advocacy and thoughtful testimony as well. I don't know who sat down first. We'll go to you.
Okay. Good morning, Senator and committee members. My name is Esperanza Vielma, and I'm a resident of Stockton, California. I'm also the chairperson for the Environmental Justice Advisory Group for the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. And I'm here basically to comment on behalf of the environmental justice communities of the Delta who deserve equitable access to life-altering information. I requested information from the BDCP or from the new plan, and I reached a recorded message in Spanish, and I received a phone call back 4 days later in which they basically gave me the same access that's on the webpage, because the assumption was that I hadn't gone to the webpage. And as of now, they stated they didn't have any further plans to translate anything other than what they currently have translated, which is the general information, and that they politely also told me that they didn't have to translate it by federal law. So they were, just the information that they had was it in terms of translation. And, but however, by human law or environmental justice law, I believe that we need equal access for all of our community members in order to engage in the discussion of water quality, especially as it's going to affect them in terms of public health. So our EJ communities, which many of you serve in terms of large percentages in the public, as being part of the public, need to be able to make comments, but they can't comment on anything that they don't know of as of now. So I ask you to see if there's any way that we can possibly urge the BDCP to make the information accessible to all the communities, and especially to the environmental justice communities in the various languages.
Thank you very much. Next, please. Welcome, Melinda.
Good morning, Melinda Terry, Central Valley Flood Control Association and North Delta Water Agency. I'm just going to bring up three different things. Dr. Swanson had mentioned the uncertainty to fish and water quality, and I think it's worth reminding the legislature that when Governor Brown was originally proposing the peripheral canal, they actually addressed uncertainty in several different ways, and I'm going to bring up two. One was in SB 200, which authorized the building of the peripheral canal, was it was going to have required the 3 intakes to be constructed in phases, and that you would build one, and then you would see what the water quality and fish impacts were over a 3-year period. You may want to do it a little bit longer because if drought cycles come a little bit later, you know, if you don't have a drought, you might really not know the impact. That was one way. That's not included in California Water Fix, was not included in BDCP. It also makes sense because these intakes that they're proposing in the North Delta are 3,000 CFS. And the reason that's important to think about is our urban intakes in the Delta, whether it's Contra Costa water intakes or Stockton's or the East Bay Mud Sac County intake at Freeport, they're all, our North Bay Aqueduct as well, they're all under 300 CFS. So a 3,000 CFS facility is humongous by comparison to our urban intakes, and there's 3 of them to go in on the Sacramento River. So that's a big impact. Another reason to maybe look at phasing. Supervisor Natoli brought up the protection of the Delta's unique values and the local assurances. Again, Governor Brown's original legislation wasn't just SB 200. It also had a companion bill. It was a constitutional amendment, ACA 90, which the voters actually approved. Never took effect because it was double joined with SB 200, which was repealed by the voters. But that included the local assurances, and they did it in a constitutional amendment because they wanted to make sure, frankly, that 50 years from then, that the legislature, through a majority vote, could not change those assurances. They were going to be guarantees, the best that they could do. Those are not provided in California Water Fix, were not provided in BDCP, but those were started by a different governor. Now Governor Brown is back. Maybe he's willing to relook at how he dealt with the political side and the impacts in the original proposal. I do think there's still legislative oversight was discussed by many people. This is a state-sponsored state project, so it does make sense that the state legislature would have oversight. And there's still really a role, I think, for the Delta counties as well. And it really is maybe creating something that you've got the oversight of the assurances that hopefully you can get put into the California water fix, but the actual mitigation measures, because you need an oversight group to make sure that they are being implemented and that they're actually working. Because oftentimes mitigation measures do not work and you need to come up with others. The locals seem like the perfect entities to help make that happen. Finally, Senator Pavley brought up, she asked about what's being done about the structural integrity of the levees, and that's important because that's key to reliability. Even under California water fix, as you heard, 52% of the time, we're relying on those South Delta pumps. So the levees, the current levee system is still important. Interestingly, CalFed, it had co-equal goals. It had 4 of them. The 2 that are missing now that CalFed had, that makes sense, and you heard talked about today, was levee integrity. They understood that the rest of the state that relies on the export of water needed to fund the maintenance of those levees. The other was water quality. Not one of the co-equal goals, interesting, but it was part of CalFed. So it does seem like an important thing to think about, because if you let those islands just fail and become open water, it actually requires more water release from our reservoirs in order to keep, because the open island now is sucking in the ocean water during the tides. And so then you have to release more fresh water from our reservoirs. That does not make sense from a reliability standpoint. So we hope you will look at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
My name is Patricia Schifferle, and I'm here today. I have written comments and 2 handouts. I joined Craig in saying that I'm retired and here on behalf of myself. However, I advise both the Sierra Business Council and also a variety of the fishing and conservation groups. And what I wanted to talk to you today about, I'm showing my age, but I was here during the last incarnation of taking water from the Sacramento and delivering it to the southern pumps in the form of the peripheral canal at that time. And now we have a new takings project. I think at that time, many questioned whether the mitigation measures would be sufficient. And at that time, as Melinda mentioned, they were dropped. And they have been dropped again. And so what we have is history, again, repeating itself. And I want to recall for you what Senator Baer said. He said, "A thirsty beast cannot be contained in a paper cage." And I think what he meant, and what we've all found out, is that many times the Delta water quality standards, the flow standards, and those things that are designed to protect the Delta, the San Francisco Bay, the commercial fishing for 3 states, industry in 3 states, the Pacific Flyway from Mexico to Alaska, not to mention the general communities and recreational and other economic benefits to over 5 million people in the San Francisco Bay Area, that those are a paper cage. And they will have a definite need to if you will, they need you to make sure that we contain this thirsty beast. We are oversizing the canals, the new tunnels, as people say. I noticed Melinda said that there's 3 intakes. You know, actually there are 5. Only 3 are going to be started, and we're going to have another 2 maybe down the road somewhere. But they're not in the official plan, but they're on the books. And we have a 15,000 CFS facility, but we're only going to use 9. Now, some have said that's like building an 8-lane freeway and only using 4. So I urge you to, I want to echo the comments here made today on oversight. You have financial and fiscal oversight. I had the pleasure of sitting, watching paint dry for a number of months while the state considered extending the existing state water project another 40 years. It was scheduled to be paid off by 2035. And now we're scheduled to extend that. But we don't have a list of what those costs are. Today, people brought up the fact that the 440 miles of existing California aqueduct is riddled with earthquake faults. There's subsidence, there's leaks. We have the Thermalito plant that needs to be rehabbed. We have dams that were built back when seismic safety considerations weren't as strong as they are today. What is that list? What is it that the DWR thinks it needs another 40 years and debt by these same ratepayers and property taxpayers to fund? We couldn't get a list of that, and I hope you could. In addition to that, we also find that, former Governor Pat Brown admitted in his oral history that he didn't really tell the truth about the original State Water Project. It was $1.75 billion, but he meant it was really $3.5. But we're up to $7.6 billion on the existing project, on the existing State Water Project, and that doesn't even include the subsidies provided by the oil, the Thailand oil money. And in this budget hearing this year, suddenly the mitigation measures were shifted from the State Water Project contractors over to the general fund. I didn't think we had extra in the general fund with libraries and parks and everything else. And I think that needs to be examined. Even Reagan's Gianelli, director of Department of Water Resources, said that the contractors should pay for their mitigation costs. We have had on the books for the existing State Water Project for almost 10 years, 28,000 acre-feet of habitat, 20,000 acres of habitat that are required. Now suddenly, is that going to be funded by you and I? People in, we're up there in Truckee. I'm in the Sierra where all the water comes from. And who is going to really pay for that, and why? Why aren't the contractors or those who benefit going to pay for that? And in addition, pay for the new problems. Okay, but the last thing I want to raise is I join with the others in saying that we need to go ahead and look at the costs and benefits of this project. The record's almost 100% for exaggerating costs, exaggerating benefits and minimizing costs. So I join with others in saying that really seriously needs your time and attention. And one final thing, I wish that you would help us get answers to these questions. We have sought since April to get questions from the Department of Water Resources, not only about the embedded employees and the existing tunnels, but we've been unsuccessful. And I've given you a copy of the correspondence and really appreciate you having the hearing. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much.